All right, so somebody asked me if I could do a video on some of these fractions. And as you can see, we have A, B, and C, and you can see we're adding fractions, subtracting fractions in two of them. And then D and E and F, we have multiplying, dividing in these three here. So I've put a tip on here so that if you don't know this tip, you can make sure that when you ever add or subtract a fraction, you must realize you always have to find a common denominator. So if these two numbers here are not the same, you can never add them together. You have to somehow find the common denominator. All right. So as you can see, none of these have the same denominator. And then if you look here, you have a mixed number, which you have a whole piece and a fractional piece. All right. And we're going to look at adding the fractional piece because adding the whole piece is easy, or subtracting. 3 minus 2, that's not such a difficult fraction, or pardon me, a number to do. So let's start with 2/3 plus 1/9, okay? The easiest way for me to do it is actually if I rewrite them on top of each other. Now, if you don't want to do it this way, you can rewrite them so that they are side by side, similar to this. And I can show you a method in order to work on these side by side. So I'll move this over just in case we want to do that. But I'll show you my method here. So if you have two numbers equal to each other, or pardon me, adding to each other, we need to find the common denominator. So what I'm trying to do is make sure that the number here and here are the same. And the only way we can do that is finding the lowest common multiple. So if we multiply 3 over and over again, we'll get 3, 6, 9, and then you'll realize that 9 is the lowest common multiple for these two numbers, because if you start at 9, you have 9, 18, 27, but of course we don't have to continue on because they match each other immediately. The second thing I need to do is ask myself, how do I go from 3 to 9? Well, if you times this by 3, you would agree you have 9. So that means that here I have to times by 3 as well on the top. So you have to do the same at the top and the bottom. So 2 times 3 is 6. And now I can look at the bottom one. Well, how do you get from 9 to 9? What do you multiply? Well, there's only one possibility. If you multiply by 1, you get 9. So on the top, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to multiply by 1. And you can see that the top and the bottom now have the same denominator. All right. And once you've done this, now you can add. So I'm going to add going down. The way I've set this up is I'm going to add going down. So when you have the same denominator, you write it on the bottom here. And now all you have to do is go 6 plus 1, which is 7. So your final answer in this case is 7 over 9. That's what we have to do when we're adding fractions. Now, if you want to do it left to right, you can do the same thing. What you can do is you can write equivalent fractions here, kind of like what I did here. But once again, you're going to try and find the common denominator, which you put 9 here and 9 here. So I'm going to change 2/3 to an equivalent fraction, meaning the same, and 1/9 to equivalent fraction. And you're going to do the same method as down here. So to go from 3 to 9, I times by 3. So here I got to times by 3. So again, I get 6 over 9, which is exactly how I've done it here. To go from 9 to 9, you times it by 1. So on the top, I'm going to times it by 1. And there we go. I have the exact same answer. So when I add these two, I'm going to have 6 plus 1, which is 7. So I have 7 on the top here. And 9 stays the same. You never change the denominator when you're adding and subtracting. So two different ways you can do it. I prefer this one to create the equivalent fractions and then you add down. That's how I learned it. All right. Question B, we're going to do the same thing except for its subtraction. So if I rewrite this here and I have 1/4, and I'm going to subtract. I put my line here. I'm going to find the equivalent fractions here. And once again, what I need to do is find the common denominator. So I'm going to put a line here and line here. and you have to find the lowest common multiple for 6. So if we go, and you can even do it here. If you have 6, the next multiple for that is 12, the next multiple for that is 18, and then we can keep going. And of course for 4, we can start with 4, then we have 8, then we have 12, and then you can see quickly that I found the lowest common multiple here, which is 12. As soon as you have matching numbers in a multiple, you found the lowest common multiple. So we know here that we have a 12, and here we have a 12. Now we're going to do the same thing as we did in the first question. How did I get from 4 to 12? Well, we're going to times this by 3, aren't we? So if I times that by 3, here we need to times this by 3, and I have 3 on 12. So you have to know your multiplication tables in order to do this method, or any method with fractions. The next question I'm going to ask is, how do I get from 6 to 12? Well, here I times it by 2. So on the top, I'm going to have to multiply it by 2 as well, and then we get 2 over 12. And as you can see, we have the same common denominator on 12 now, but I'm going to subtract instead of adding. So what is 2 minus 3? Well, 2 minus 3 is actually -1. And then now I have the common denominator, which I keep the same. So in this case, we have a positive number subtracting a negative number, and our result is negative. And we can have negative fractions. That's totally fine. Okay. My third fraction here, we have subtraction again. And I'm going to write it the same way. I'm going to go 3 1/3, and then I'm going to have 2 2/5. Okay. Now, subtracting mixed fractions, this is always a little bit harder for students. So some students like to change the mixed fractions into improper fractions first because they find it easier. So instead of subtracting mixed fractions, what we can do is do this. So to change these two mixed numbers into improper fractions, remember we're going to take the denominator, multiply it against the whole number. So 3 times 3 is 9. And then when we go up here, we're going to add it to the numerator. So 3 times 3 is 9, plus 1 is 10 over 3. And now we're going to do that with a second mixed number. 5 times 2 is 10, plus 2 is 12 over 5. All right? So all I've done is I've changed these mixed numbers to improper fractions. Okay? And now I'm going to do the same strategy as these two here before. All I did was find the common denominator. So what we're going to do is find an equivalent fraction with the common denominator. So if this is the case, what's the lowest common multiple between 3 and 5? Well, if you keep multiplying 3 and 5, you'll eventually get them matching at 15. So the lowest common multiple between 3 and 5 is 15. So if this is the case, now we have to ask ourselves, how, once again, did I get from 5 to 15? Well, I times it by 3. So 5 times 3 is 15, so that means on the top I should times this by 3 as well, shouldn't I? 3 times 12, well, if you use your calculator, you should get 36 in this case, okay? So you can use your calculator for that. And now for the second one I have, how did I get from 3 to 15? Well, here you times it by 5, didn't you? So that means on the top, I should times this by 5 as well. So 10 times 5 is 50. So I'm just going to write these again. I'm going to extend my line because we want to subtract. And I'm just going to rewrite these. So we have 50 over 15, subtract 36 over 15. Okay? And so we've done this, and now we have the common denominator. So we can go 50 minus 36. So if we do that, 50 minus 30 is 20, minus another 6 is 14. And our denominator is 15. So there we have it. Now we know how to add or subtract mixed fractions. the easiest way is to first change them to improper fractions like I did in the pink here. The second, find the common denominator. And then third, I do the subtraction, and here's my final answer. So the first video here is on adding and subtracting fractions. I'll put another video together to do the second round of fractions, which is multiplying and dividing.